Welcome to Coast View. I hope you're having a great day. This is the show that celebrates every single day the men and women who are making coastal Mississippi such an amazing place to live, work, and play. You know, we have the opportunity on Coast View to talk to such a wide range of leaders that are contributing so many in positive ways. You may have heard more recently, I've had a couple of shows where this issue of FEMA and some of their requirements is hit. You know, the truth is it's kind of in there hitting all communities in some way. But the reality, I'm saying those communities that have FEMA flood maps to deal with. But when you look at Pascagoula in particular, when you look at how FEMA regulations in the wake of Hurricane Katrina have impacted Pascagoula, it has been very, very significant. It's affected property values. It's affected the city's ability to build housing for workers. I mean, really, the list goes on and on as it relates to those challenges. And I've talked a little bit about this SOS Pascagoula effort that has emerged. And the brainchild of that, I would say, someone who's on a mission as it relates to that is Mary Martha Henson, who's the Deputy Director of Jackson County Economic Development Foundation. And I've invited her to join me on Coast View today so we can talk more about that SOS Pascagoula effort. Again, it impacts Pascagoula in a very significant way. But it's truly a coast issue from, I would say, along the eastern seaboard, all the way down to Key West or along the Gulf states. I mean, I think everyone faces it. But it's a little bit like the frog boiling in water. If you don't really, really focus on it, suddenly the water's going to come to a boil, and the water's boiling in Pascagoula right now. So without any further ado, Mary Martha, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
It's good to see you. So we'll come back to SOS Pascagoula here in just a second. But what makes, and we've talked about this sometime before, but I just want to make sure that the average listener who may not have seen our previous conversations, they can fully grasp why you're the right person for this job in this moment. Let's give people a sense of what you did prior to coming to your current role as Deputy Director of the Jackson County Economic Development Foundation. And we'll talk a little bit more about why it's critical to have some of that sort of really Washington behind the scenes experience that can help us in a situation in America now where there's a lot of noise on the national level and really difficult to get everybody focused on an issue like this. So give them some of that background.
Sure. So first of all, I'm a Mississippian. I was born and raised in Mississippi. Had the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. early in my career. And so I spent 10 years working in the Mississippi congressional delegation in Washington, D.C. I first started in the House of Representatives. I was the staff member to my boss on the Energy and Commerce Committee. So at that point, I was exposed to issues from tax to healthcare to energy, commerce. I mean, issues that have such a direct impact in Mississippi. I then came home to Mississippi and ran the Mississippi Economic Development Council. That is the trade association for economic developers and chamber of commerces across the state of Mississippi. And at that time, Ricky, I worked with Mississippi Economic Council, and we did a competitiveness study where we brought Deloitte Consulting in to look at our ability to compete and to be honest with ourselves as a state. What were we going to have to do to be more competitive, to grow the economy and bring high-paying jobs here? When Senator Cochran became the chairman of appropriations, I made a decision to go back. And at that point, during my time in Senator Cochran's office, I served as his legislative director. And so it gave me an opportunity to work on every issue in the federal government with a team of about 25 staffers. So I worked on defense issues, foreign policy issues, and the issue we're going to talk about today was very near and dear to the senator's heart. And I got a lot of opportunities to work on this national flood insurance issue and really understand what's driving some of the policies around national flood insurance.
That's an incredible background. And just a quick side note here, one of the real pleasures of being publisher of the Sun Herald was the opportunity that I got to work super closely with Dad Cochran. Not only before Katrina, but especially after Katrina and the role that he played. What a statesman. And, here's a guy who certainly he was conservative, but he believed that you got to be willing to work across the aisle to get things done. And we're in a moment in our nation's history where working across the aisle is not something that is celebrated in the way it should be. And it's frustrating, isn't it?
It is frustrating. It really is.
When you deal with an issue like this, and let's and we'll zero in specifically on the issue next, but when you deal with an issue like this in this sort of political environment, this polarized political environment, where there's so much noise on the national scale, good Lord, and we're so busy debating that we don't really solve issues the way we need to. What's the template look like to get the attention of FEMA so they can make some adjustments? And we'll get to specifically what those adjustments need to be here shortly. But how do you cut through the noise?
So, I mean, first of all, let's just step back and talk about Jackson County. At the end of the day, I think what makes Jackson County unique and successful is its partnerships here. We work with our industry, we work with our elected officials, we work with our schools. So everybody that has an impact in this community, we work with here at this foundation. I think you also, Ricky, have to be honest about your challenges in your community. Every community has challenges. It can be workforce, it could be a public policy issue, housing, diversified economy. And so when you're honest about your challenges, it then allows you to find solutions. And what we say here at the foundation is, what's the why? What is the why to our challenges? And so on this particular issue, what's the template? The template is the partnerships, bringing Chevron, Ingalls, Halter Marine, Rolls-Royce to the table, bringing the schools, the Chamber of Commerce, the Board of Supervisors, the city. First of all, you have to do that. Secondly is you have to get in the minds of people in Washington. I remind people that not everybody's been to Mississippi. That's very unfortunate, but some people have never been here. And so they have a perception of Mississippi and Washington that's very different than what you and I and our constituents across Mississippi, we appreciate and love about Mississippi. And so you have to get in the minds of what people in Washington think and what's going to drive them to change a policy.
Yeah, I agree. Listen, I've often referred to the Jackson County Economic Development Foundation is really a best practice for how public-private partnership should work, where you have elected officials that are involved, you've got key leaders in industry involved. I was really touched by the videos you guys put together for SOS Pascagoula, and toward the end, the point was made that these workers are building ships that protect the world, but we can't stay focused enough on building housing for them where they can live in the city. So let's start with this. I think a really good, when people think about the 50% rule, people who were here after Katrina, what they remember about that is that if they did not have more than 50% damage on their home, FEMA would allow them to rebuild without raising their home, and they would be then grandfathered in. Well, there's a whole nother issue about grandfathering in as it relates to the new flood insurance program. We've talked about that before, but the 50% rule still haunts us in a really big way. So let's talk specifically about that impact and how it is especially impacted Pascagoula.
Yeah, it haunts us certainly, and it's only gotten worse. Right now in the city of Pascagoula, on average, we're tearing down 2 to 3 houses a month. I mean, think about the economic impact of what that's doing, not only to Pascagoula, but the state of Mississippi. And so what's happened here over the last 15 years since Katrina, it's a bad policy that's gone awry. And we just said, it is time that we take this on. We cannot sit back and hope that FEMA addresses this. We can't hope that at some point we, address risk rating 2.0. We get new maps, because it's debilitating Pascagoula. And what's so hard to understand about this, Ricky, is that over the last 24 months, this community has announced over 5,000 new jobs and close to $650 million of new capital investment. So you've got the most industrialized city in the state of Mississippi, with jobs on average around 77,000. 50,000 is what the state of Mississippi's manufacturing average is. So we've got high-paying jobs, but yet people cannot even live in the most industrialized city in the state of Mississippi. something doesn't make sense. And so we had to start dealing with this issue. And it truly is, when you think about it at its core, it's an economic development issue, because isn't economic development about creating wealth, creating job opportunities, and growing your economy? And so that's why the foundation said, we're bringing the partners to the table and we're going to take this issue on.
So it was shocking. So again, we'll talk specifically, and we're coming to the end of this segment, but I'll kind of set it up and we'll pick it up on the other side. But the issue is it's extremely frustrating because Katrina hit us. It created a data point, and specifically for Pascagoula, it created a data point that then gets factored into this base flood elevation requirement. And for Pascagoula, unfortunately, it ended up building that much higher because a lot of homes were not more than 50% damaged. They were able to rebuild at the lower, and essentially grandfathered in. But this new rule, this new 50% rule, makes it so that if a tree falls on your house, you can't fix it because, well, we'll talk about why that is. And what that happens is you can't improve homes and still have them be insured by FEMA. It's a real problem. We'll come back on the other side and continue this part of the conversation. Welcome back to Coast View. As I tried to summarize before we went to the break, there's some really fundamental problems with the way that FEMA handles its policies. And essentially, well, there's two routes. One is they could change their policies as it relates to this issue and relieve the burden on communities like Pascagoula, or it will require some legislation somewhere along the way. Hopefully we could get FEMA just to make some administrative changes in the way that they look at their program. But as I've discussed in the past, this new FEMA approach to 2.0 risk rating system that they just put into place, there's a lot of lack of disclosure and transparency about the way they're approaching that. And that, unfortunately, sort of mucks up the works as it relates to the SOS Pascagoula effort on this 50% rule. But it ends up hitting Pascagoula much harder. You had, of course, homes along the beach were wiped away, but you had a significant portion of the city that had flooding. And so you had a lot of homes that did not meet met the 50% requirement for not having to rebuild higher than the current flood mapping. They were allowed to be grandfathered in. It's the lingering effect of that, though. If you want to put a new roof in, or you want to add a couple of rooms to your house and all of that, it's amazing that you are not allowed to do that. So essentially, there's so many homes in Pascagoula that have not been able to have major renovations done, which is the reason why we see homes literally being taken down. And that impacts the city's ability to grow and serve the needs of workers. And it's serious. I mean, when you guys went back and looked at the data, what did it tell you about the loss of value inside the city?
So let's talk about that data point, because it's so important as we frame this conversation, Ricky. I remind people, before Katrina, only about 10 to 12% of Pascagoula was in a flood zone. When we remapped after Katrina, 82% of Pascagoula is in a flood zone. So therefore, this particular rule that we're talking about today impacts almost the entire city of Pascagoula. And it's not just residential properties. This is commercial properties also. So what's really hard to reconcile is that you've got Chevron and Ingalls and Halter that are making investments in downtown Pascagoula. We're in a post-COVID environment where we see that people want to live in mixed-use buildings. We have that going on in Pascagoula, but yet people can't live in homes and make their home in Pascagoula because of a bad policy. So it's having, every day it continues to have this just downward spiral of an impact on this community.
Okay, so what have you done so far? And have you been able to get the ear of the people who can make a difference?
Yes. So this is something that the foundation has been working on for several years behind the scenes. First of all, you have to understand the policy. So I've worked for some time to write legislation and work with our congressional delegation, primarily the Mississippi delegation, to help them understand how this is impacting Mississippi. So that's the first piece of it. Secondly, anytime you work on federal policy, as much as we think it's good policy and it should be taken care of today, we're talking about the United States of America. The fact is that you have to know the timing and the vehicle that it moves in. And so what we have done is we've made this personal. You know, when you look at the videos and you hear the testimony and you hear of these people that want to live that work at Ingalls and they want to live 2 miles from the shipyard, or they want to put their children in the Pascagoula school district, but they can't. That's real people. That's not something we're making up. This is really what's happening here. And so what we've done is we've rolled out SOS Pascagoula. That's a marketing, a branding. You can go to the website and you can share your story. To date, we've had over 25 people that have written in to share their story about what's going on and why they can't live and make their home in Pascagoula, Mississippi. We've also done video work. You know, we were very fortunate that former Governor Barber was willing to roll this out with us because he was the governor during Katrina. He remembers this. I worked, you know, in the congressional delegation at the time. Governor Barber spent hours and hours with boots on the ground. And so we were able to include him in this effort. And those videos, it includes bankers, it includes school officials, it includes Ingalls and Chevron, because again, it's a community-wide effort and it's having real impact.
You know, one of the things that's frustrated me after Katrina was because the storm hit us, we get this like United States record data point of the storm surge. But I don't know why they didn't just model that across all coastal communities so they could spread the risk. It does seem, since it hit us, that it unfairly hit us. But I guess, you know, that's the way they operate, and that's the way it is. And there's very little that we can do about that now. What's the prospects for getting change? And you agree that there's an administrative possibility inside FEMA, but I think that it's rare that ever solves that. We will get a solution doing that approach. It's probably going to take legislation, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, Ricky, I mean, yes, we would love to just work with FEMA and get this changed, and there's always that hope. But when you work in Washington, I learned many years ago, you have Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. And Plan D, you need it, because there's a lot of dynamics that happen in Washington, a lot of things outside of our control. But why now? Why have we decided this is the right timing? Well, there's a lot of conversation around a long-term reauthorization on National Flood Insurance Program. There's the risk rating 2.0. When insurance prices continue to hit people's pocketbooks, the members of Congress are going to hear from their constituents.
Yeah.
Issues that impact your money is an issue that gets people calling their congressmen, their senators, and talking about it. And so as we continue to do this risk rating 2.0, and to your point, Ricky, we're just now seeing the impact of what that's going to have on homeowners. And so because of that, we feel like the timing is right, because there's going to be an appetite at some point in Congress to start dealing with this issue. And so it's about finding that vehicle and finding the right time. And, you know, I can't say enough good things about our congressional delegation. They've been very helpful. They have been there with us through writing the legislation and getting this ready. But again, they've got to have personal testimonies and stories to help them tell the story in Washington. And I want to remind people of this data point, because it always amazes me. And when I tell people this, particularly down here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, I get this dumbfounded look. But what's happened in Washington is a lot of people there in Washington, again, have not been to Mississippi, and they make assumptions. They think that what's happened here is this is people's second homes. These are people's beach homes. People choose to live here. That is correct, that people choose to live here, but most people that choose to live along the Mississippi Gulf Coast are hardworking people that their jobs require them to live here. It's not where people have beach homes. And so there's this misconception in Washington that, why should we help them? This is where people just own a second home, and that is absolutely not true. And so again, it's getting in the heads of politicians in Washington, understanding what's driving them, and then trying to make sure that we message it and tell the story of what's actually happening here.
If you go back and look at some of what leaders at FEMA have said, they are part of the reason people have that perspective. They even in the rollout of Risk Rating 2.0, they talked about second homes and vacation homes and whatever. So you're incredibly right about that. I remember many editorials we wrote about this after Hurricane Katrina at the Sun Herald. A Delaware senator said, speaking of our issues down here in coastal Mississippi, that we should not, these are just rich people who live on the beach. Why should we help them? There's such a misnomer around what this community really stands for and what it's all about. And I have to come back to the video, and I would encourage people really to pay close attention. You can go to sospascagoula.com and see the video that we're talking about. I would say, Haley didn't just play a role; he narrated it, and it's very compelling. I mean, you let the voices of those who are involved, as you point out, a very diverse group of people say what they needed to say. But I think the ultimate question, I mean, especially, listen to that, we're not just building the ships to protect the world, but we're refining. If you think about the refining capacity that we have and how it's serving the U.S. and abroad, for that matter, it's critical what we're doing. And it's amazing to me that we keep having to fight that perception. But listen, we're coming to the end of our time together. Mary Martha, it's been a terrific opportunity for me to chat with you. We'll come back again and continue to have this conversation. And hopefully, we'll continue, we'll raise the voice. We can have Louisiana and Texas and Florida and up the Eastern Seaboard. We got to get them all involved in this conversation, because that's what it's going to take for us to get success. So thanks for being able to work in the trenches, and good luck to you.
Thank you, Ricky.
It's my pleasure. When we come back, we'll have Drake Bassett, and we'll talk about the foster children situation here in Mississippi. We'll see you when we get back.